Welcome, Tenno, to the Church of Red Crits. Here we worship one thing and one thing only: massive damage numbers with as many exclamation marks as possible. In today's video, I will show you how you can harness the ultimate power of the Red Crit Priest Harrow. I will explore every ability in full detail and discuss multiple ways to build Harrow to please our Red Crit god. Cue the intro. Harrow was released back in 2017, with his Prime becoming available in 2021. Harrow is regarded, and in my opinion, remains one of the best examples of peak Warframe design. His abilities are incredibly synergistic, and sacrificing any of them to my Helminth feels like a crime whenever I do it. Although Fred is probably very happy. Let's talk about the design philosophy of Harrow. His main theme is high crit damage, rewarded for high accuracy and tactical gameplay. Using his abilities at the right time, in the correct way, will reward you with obscene damage output. However, there's an added risk of timing ability used wrong, resulting in mistakes that can quickly be punished, making him one of the real first risk and reward type Warframes. When Harrow was released, he was accompanied by the Scourge, a spear gun that I will cover later in the video, which takes his synergies to an even further level. And he was also released with the Knell, a gun that rewards headshots with infinite ammo and increased status chance as well as crit damage. When comparing Harrow to Harrow Prime will have additional shields and additional energy. Furthermore, Harrow Prime will come with an additional Madurai polarity, and if this wasn't enough, Harrow Prime is also easily farmable through Void Relics, although he is currently vaulted, so you may have to wait a bit before you can get his relics with Aya at Visaria. Anyways, enough about the general information, let's dive into what Harrow has to offer. First, let's have a look at Harrow's passive ability, which is able to increase his overshield cap and guarantees you begin every mission with maximum energy. This is very handy if you want to build Harrow for quick exterminates, where you can spam abilities like Thermal Sunder, as you don't have to go out of your way to build up your energy. With his passive, Harrow's overshield cap is 1200 overshield, larger than usual. For those of you who don't know what overshield is, it's an additional shield that gets added on top of your basic shield, and it will make your shield value, indicated in the top right of your screen, turn from blue to magenta. Overshields are also great for regaining full duration of shield gates, which can go up to a full 2.5 seconds when using Prime's redirection on Harrow. You will also see later in this guide that the increased shield pool will synergize very well with Harrow's overall kit. When you pick up Harrow and you start preaching, you will encounter a lot of pagans that do not worship our Red Crit god. Thus, we condemn them with our first ability. This is a one-handed ability that allows movement and the use of weapons while casting. It moves forward in a rectangular line in front of Harrow, which is 2.5 meters wide and 20 meters long, both of which can be increased with ability range. Hitting enemies with Condemn will cause Harrow to gain up to 150 shields per enemy hit, which is increased by modding for ability strength. If shields are already full, it will generate the just mentioned overshields up to a 2400 overshield cap. The main idea behind Condemn is that it will lock enemies into place, exposing their heads, which allows for easier headshots and quick cleansing of sins that our enemies have committed. Worthy of note is that Harrow can also use this ability to stun lock acolytes, submitting them to hear the word of our Lord loud and clear. A side effect of Condemn is that as of making this video, it's able to trigger Arcane Ice Storm, which is usually only triggered upon hitting maximum cold stacks on an enemy. This allows for an easy source of ability strength and ability duration on Harrow. However, this interaction is most likely not intended, and if it does get changed, I will update the pinned comment. When casting Condemn in mid-air, it will force you back to the ground. However, it will only occur from a relatively high height, and generally you can cast Condemn even when aim gliding. Condemn is also easily able to fully replenish your shield while also stun locking enemies, making this ability your main tool for survivability on Harrow builds that do not use a subsumed ability. However, shields will not be generated on enemies that have Overguard, which in endgame Fissure missions can be around 50% of the enemies due to ancient protector spawns, so be aware of this. Harrow's second ability Penance is an ability that will consume your shields and overshields in 2 quick swoops of Harrow's pendulum. Once the sacrifice of shields has been made, 50% of these shields will be converted into health, and our red crit god will bestow a blessing upon you of an additive buff to fire rate and reload speed, all scaling with Harrow's ability strength. And his generosity extends even beyond this, by offering Harrow lifesteal, through which Harrow can heal teammates, specters, or companions within affinity range. The buff will be active for 4 seconds at base and will gain extra duration for every 100 shields or overshields consumed, up to 120 seconds maximum, and the duration that you get per shields are scaled with ability duration. It's important to note that while the ability can be recast while it's active, it will snapshot the strength values from when it was first cast, and recasting it will only refresh the duration. So if you are using arcanes, such as Augmented, it's advised to at some point let Penance run out and improve the values of the buff. Besides this, as I mentioned, Penance is able to heal allies within affinity range, and this range can be increased with the Vesperin Focus School or consumable items called Phosphor Rod and Phosphor Blau. Both of these phosphors can be used simultaneously to increase your affinity range by a whopping 400 meters. Using all of these increases together will net you with a ridiculous 475 meter affinity range, which is bigger than any regular tile set, apart from the open worlds of course. Finally, the fire rate buff will oddly enough also apply additively to the attack speed of melee weapons, enabling Harrow to be a decent Warframe for a full melee build. Then it's time for Harrow's third ability, Thurible. Casting of Thurible will cause Harrow to swing his pendulum, charging and pleading to the god of Red Crit to bless him with the power of Arcane Energize on every enemy vanquished. The longer Thurible is charged, the more energy will be restored on kill. The energy value, which is shown on the right side of your screen, is a percent of the total base energy spent, meaning that ability efficiency won't affect this value. However, this value is scaled by modding for ability strength. Thurible allows for full movement while casting, including bullet jumps, rolls, and aim glides. However, you cannot shoot or melee. Thurible can also be deactivated whenever you want, simply by pressing the ability again. The Thurible effect will be bestowed upon allies that are within 20 meters of Harrow, scaling with ability range, and the buff will last for 35 seconds base, scaling with ability duration. To speed up the amount of energy consumed, you can use ability casting speed increases from mods like Natural Talent and Speed Drift, or from Ember Archon Shards. Finally, scoring headshots is rewarded with 4 times the amount of energy that Thurible has charged. It may be important to note that headshots can be obtained sporadically from melee attacks, which I also covered in my evade video. To fully pledge ourselves to the god of red crits, we enter a sacred covenant with Harrow's 4th ability. This ability provides a brief window of invulnerability for 6 seconds, scaling with ability duration, that affects all allies within affinity range. This can be great in clutch scenarios when you need to escape some enemy heat. However, you will then be met with a large cooldown duration, as you cannot recast Covenant until it has ran out. The window of invulnerability that Covenant gives presents with the perfect opportunity to cast Penance and to charge up your Thurible, as nothing is able to hurt you. Damage dealt to Harrow will be stored and converted into a flat crit chance buff, which can go up to 50% on body shots and 200% on headshots. The crit chance bonus will start at a base 5% increase, and every 100 damage dealt to Harrow, it will increase by 1.5%, both scaling with ability strength up to the 50% max that I just mentioned. Headshots will always have this crit chance buff multiplied by 4. The 50% limit is easily reached without any effort on missions with high enemy levels, as they will output loads of damage, which means that you do not have to mod for an insanely high ability strength, unless of course you want to supercharge your Penance for maximum fire rate and reload speed. Now, I also said that this crit chance buff is a flat buff. This means that it can turn any weapon into a crit machine when you score headshots, as 200% will immediately result in orange crits, even if you have a 0% crit chance on your weapon. For instance, here I have the Sporothrix, which has a base 1% crit chance. However, with Harrow's buff, this actually turns into a 201% crit chance on headshots, which is great because for some reason the Sporothrix has a relatively high 3x crit multiplier. It may also be helpful to mention that this crit chance buff applies to your companions, which means that when you are playing Harrow, it doesn't really matter what companion weapon you use, as you can always trigger Tenacious Bond, which requires you to have 50% crit chance on your companion weapon. Tenacious Bond will then give you a further 1.2 times final crit damage multiplier, basically for free. Another odd interaction occurs with Zata's Whisper, which usually has a minus 50% crit chance. However, upon receiving the crit chance buff from Covenant, Zata's separate void damage instance will be able to crit upon headshots, which causes some very silly damage output since the headshot multiplier double dips in Zata's output damage calculation. With the right weapon types and mods, you will often see higher damage output from your Zata's Whisper proc than from the original damage dealt to the targets. You can push this even further by equipping the Vigilante mod set, which is able to increase the Zata crit another tier to red crits. These interactions were also shown by the YouTube channel O___, which I will link in the description. Beware that this interaction is most likely a bug and that it could be fixed in the future. If this happens, I again will update the pinned comment. You can supercharge this bugged interaction by using buffs that increase headshot or weak spot modifiers, like the new Acuity mods and primary and secondary deadhead, as well as some Incarnon perks and weapon-specific mods. A full list of headshot buffs can be found on the wiki, and I will also link this in the description of the video. At this point, I also need to mention Multiplicative crit, which I have covered in an older video where I dive into details of the calculation of crit chance and explain how some sources of crit chance form an additional multiplier. Since the release of that video, DE decided to print some very silly mods, namely the Acuity mods. These new mods are also multiplicative sources of crit chance on a select number of weapons. The list of weapons where Acuity is multiplicative can be found on the Warframe wiki, and I will show them here on screen as well. However, make sure to check the wiki page, linked in the description, to see the most up-to-date list. The Acuity mods on these specific weapons will be multiplicative all the way at the end of the crit chance formula, also multiplying flat crit chance values from, for instance, Arcane Avenger and the Adarza Kafat. This insane crit chance will work amazingly well with high crit damage multipliers, which will continue to increase in strength whenever higher crit tiers are reached. The scaling of the crit damage multiplier has also been discussed in a previous video, linked on screen right now and in the description as well. I definitely recommend watching these videos as they will help you understand an integral part of building for crit damage in Warframe. Now it's time to go back to some weird Harrow math. While testing, I found that Covenant's math works quite peculiarly. Instead of applying a flat 200% buff to headshot critical chance, it's calculated as a 4 times increase of the base maximum of 50. So base crit chance plus Covenant percent times 1 plus 3. When you then take this and use it on weapons with multiplicative crit, Acuity, as well as Cascadia accuracy, will stack within the same headshot increase multiplier, which means that the formula will look like this. You will get base crit chance plus the Covenant percent times 1 plus 3, which is from Covenant itself, and then Acuity and Cascadia accuracy are added within this same multiplier, which can be 3.5 or 3 respectively. Furthermore, Acuity and Cascadia accuracy will still apply the multiplicative crit to other crit chance mods, effectively causing them to double dip in the crit chance formula when you are using Harrow. This means that we can push some of the secondaries to have absurd crit chance values. In some scenarios, crit chance can actually run so high it will show blue negative crits, a phenomenon which I discussed in my crit multiplier video. However, as I also discussed there, the number isn't representative of the actual damage output, as shown here by the blast procs resulting from the headshot, which are only dealing 5 million damage. Now, having discussed all of Harrow's abilities, let's dive into the augment mods he has currently available. First is Tribunal, which is an augment for Condemn. When using Condemn with this augment, allies in your squad can shoot chain targets for both the Thurible buff and the Penance buff, to be applied to them at 100% effectiveness. This 100% effectiveness is locked and cannot be scaled through modding. If you want your allies to benefit from both your Thurible and Penance buffs, you do need to make sure that you have them active on your Harrow. Allies restoring energy or health through both abilities are also then distributed back to Harrow, giving an endless supply of energy in return. This can be great if you want to specify more towards a support build, which I also will feature in the build section of this guide. The next augment for Harrow is Warding Thurible, which can give yourself and allies within cast range a 50% damage reduction, scaling with ability strength up to a 90% damage reduction max. It will also provide additional energy charge whenever you or allies take damage. Funnily enough, this damage reduction will also work on defense objectives. However, in this case, it will be kept at a 50% damage reduction. Nonetheless, you can stack this with an Ancient Healer Spectre for a more effective 75% damage reduction in total, which can be nice for the Mirror Defense weekly that you can get in Elite Deep Archimedia. Finally, the last augment we have at the moment for Harrow is Lasting Covenant, which will refresh and lengthen the bonus of Covenant upon scoring a headshot. This will be a 3-second extension at base, scaling with ability duration, and the final total duration of Covenant is then 3 times as long as your modded duration for the ability. This will also apply to Covenant given to allies, enabling them to keep the buff up themselves. And if you score headshots frequently enough, you will be able to keep the buff indefinitely. Before I get into the builds, I will cover some more general things options that you can apply on all of your Harrow builds. I will cover the Archon Shards, the Companions, the weapon considerations, the Helminth options, and the focus schools. For the Archon Shards, I like running my Harrow with 2 Emerald Archon Shards and 1 Ember Shard for pretty much all base builds. This is for casting speed and passive armor strip with the extra corrosive stacks. Don't worry if you don't have them Tau forged, regular ones will be okay. I then use the 2 other slots as flex slots for additional duration or strength, melee crit damage, or even secondary crit chance from Topaz Archon Shards. In most cases you will be fine without full armor strip, so you can consider dropping the 2 Emerald Shards for 2 more shards of the options that I just mentioned, or anything else you feel like you need on your build. Remember when I said this? It may also be helpful to mention that this crit chance buff applies to your companions. Yes, every companion will be able to make use of Tenacious Bond regardless of the weapon you are using. This opens up the companion slot to pretty much any companion you feel comfortable with and that you would want to use on your build. My personal favorites are Warframe Prime with Negate and Guardian for extra layers of survivability, and the Panzerville Pfeiler for extra loot and passive viral priming of enemies. But like I said, this is really up to you. If you want to buff the hell out of a Nautilus Prime with some silly crit chance on the Verglass Prime, then go wild baby, live your dream. As for the weapons that you can use on Harrow yourself, first I want to mention perhaps the most important weapon that you could pick on Harrow, which is his signature Scourge or Scourge Prime Speargun. The Scourge is an amazing weapon which enables you to easily hit headshots, making Pleasing of the Red Crit God a cakewalk. When you throw out the Scourge, it will spawn a field of bullet attraction around enemy heads, and simply shooting in the general direction of their head will convert your shot into a headshot. This spear gun will take up the primary slot in your loadout, so if you want to use this gun, make sure you pick a powerful secondary, which I will have a few recommendations of coming up. The Scourge can be modded for a primer setup with the new primary crux, as it can easily trigger itself, giving you access to load of status chance and ammo efficiency. Besides this, the Scourge also has innate corrosive damage, meaning it's one of the few guns in the game where you can mod for corrosive and viral simultaneously. However, the Scourge also possesses multiplicative condition overload, making it an actually decent damaging weapon if you combine it with a secondary primer like the Compressor or the Epitaph. Which reminds me that I will have a video on multiplicative condition overload coming out soon, and once it's online I will get it linked in the description of this video so you can learn more about this Warframe mechanic. Anyways, for the primers, I usually build them as shown on screen, using secondary encumber to proc additional status types for maximum damage. Now, if you trust your MLG 360 aim and don't mind actively shooting for heads, you can also consider using other primaries. As I mentioned, multiplicative crit is insanely strong on Harrow due to the multiplicative crit sources double dipping in the crit chance formula. This means that the list of multiplicative guns you can find on the wiki are choices that you could all consider and you should definitely mess around with. Maybe you even have some of these weapons modded already. I personally like using the Staltha a lot, as this weapon has both multiplicative crit and multiplicative condition overload. However, it is usually a bit sluggish to use due to its low fire rate and slow reload. Luckily, this is completely fixed by using Harrow if you use Penance. With the Staltha, you can enjoy some damage output that you will never actually need. As for the secondaries, you can look at the list of multiplicative crit weapons here as well, but there are also some non-multiplicative crit weapons you can consider too. A classic combination and meta choice is the Dual Toxicist Incarnon, which is also one of my personal favorites. I built mine for full multi-shot using the multi-shot Incarnon perk, and I also go for the crit chance and crit damage on the final Incarnon evolution. The Dual Toxicist Incarnon is best paired with the Scourge, since it has a ricochet mechanic whenever you deal headshots, giving you some AoE potential as well. If you want something non-meta, I personally enjoy using the Onos from the multiplicative secondaries list, as just like the Staltha, it is both multiplicative crit and multiplicative condition overload, but only on the primary fire. So it is advised that you actually never use its Incarnal mode. It also features a 120% additive source of headshot multiplier increase on sequential headshots, which combined with secondary deadhead is able to provide a 150% increase to headshot damage. If you then combine this with pistol acuity, you will jump up your base headshot multiplier from 3 all the way to 20.6. Now, as I explained in my crit damage multiplier video, this will drastically increase our crit damage output on headshots, especially paired with the 1413% final critical chance we have. All of this together will give us a 5154 times crit multiplier on headshots without any shards or ribbons. If we do factor in shards and ribbons, as well as Arcane Corpuscular, we can get this up to a whopping 11,058 times critical damage multiplier on headshots. This frankly absurd damage increase allows you to hit damage cap numbers with just a little bit of build tweaking. On my Onos build, I run a high amount of raw damage increase for multiplicative scaling with galvanized aptitude, and I use heat for the scaling of Topaz Archon Shards for even more crit chance. For the arcane, you can also consider using secondary outburst instead of secondary deadhead if you take a melee with high initial combo like the ceramic dagger incarnon. Please do not feel limited by the options that I propose in this video, as Harrow is one of the best weapon platforms in the game and can pretty much lift every weapon up into usable or god tier status. If you yourself want to reach god tier status as well, maybe consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on this video, as it will massively help out in the algorithm and enables me to continue to create these types of frame deep dives. Now, let's get back to it. For the melee recommendations, I already said that the ceramic dagger incarnon with high initial combo can be great to pair with secondary outburst. But if you go this route, you can also consider using the Harrow Prime, as it will be able to go up to a 13 times combo, giving you just that little bit more totally irrelevant damage. Me personally, I like using the Praedos as a stat stick for movement speed as well as parkour velocity. In general, the same goes for the melees as for the other weapon types. If you plan on using Harrow as a weapons platform, pretty much any melee will be okay. Just beware that, as I've discussed in this video as well as in my evade video, that some enemy factions are easier to score melee headshots on than others. Then up next are the Helminth considerations for Harrow. By far the best option is none. Harrow has one of the best synergized and designed kits in the entire game, and most of the time taking off one of his abilities feels like you are losing part of what makes the frame great. If you do want to mess around with the Helminths nonetheless, I do have some options that I have enjoyed using myself. First and foremost is evade. Evade makes going to level cap an absolute breeze, as nothing beats the survivability that invisibility gives you in Warframe. It is one of the cheesiest ways to become a literal god, drastically reducing your chances on carpal tunnel compared to when you try to play Harrow with shield gating and Condemn spam. This is personally my favorite Harrow subsume option, which I also covered in my evade video, and I will feature again in the evade build in just a few moments. The other Helminth that you can consider is Thermal Sunder. Thermal Sunder from Gauss makes spam casting and nuking rooms on base star chart an absolute breeze. And seeing the literal sea of energy stream in on the right side of your screen enables all of those neurons to get maximum dopamine. This ability is especially great for leveling in Sanctuary Onslaught and for speedrunning relics in exterminates, captures or rescues. The final Helminth ability I've used is Sata's Whisper for the bugged interaction, but this was more for the meme potential, as it is just incredibly funny to see the whisper damage far exceed the actual damage that you are dealing in the first place. However, this will sacrifice either your fire rate buff from Penance or your shield gating from Condemn. If you go with the latter option, I would recommend using the Vesperin Focus School for the protective sling passive, which will give you small periods of invulnerability. Talking about the focus schools, in pretty much all scenarios I found Madurai to be the best pick for me, but you may also consider using Unairu if you don't have access to primed sure-footed yet. As for most people, survivability will be a non-issue as long as you don't push level cap, energy income will be a non-issue due to Thurible, and the only thing you would really benefit from are the increased cast speed and ability strength from Madurai or the knockdown resistance from Unairu. Now it's time to get into the builds. The first build I want to discuss is the base Harrow build, which uses no Helminth abilities and will set you down 5 Forma. Although don't despair, because I will show a cheap version of this build in a little bit. In this build, and for most of the builds following this, I used the new Worthy Camaraderie Aura mod, as this is a multiplicative increase to crit chance on some guns, just like the Acuity mods. And it also synergizes nicely with Harrow's general theme of dealing high damage headshots. I then chose to build for duration and ability strength, and I used primed redirection for a massive shield pool. I then offset the reduction in range from narrow-minded by only leveling it to level 6 and using a stretch mod to end up with a 103% range, which is more than sufficient for casting Condemn and locking down enemies. For the arcanes, I went with Molt Efficiency for additional duration, as we'll pretty much have overshields all of the time. And I used the bugged interaction of Condemn with Arcane Ice Storm to get even more ability duration, as well as some additional ability strength. This build will serve you well across all different game modes and is able to push really high level. Even level cap can be achieved, but this will 100% be easier in a squad, as enemy aggro will be distributed between you and other teammates, resulting in less Condemn spam needed for shield gating to stay alive. For the budget version of the build that any new player can pick up, I recommend this one, which uses a grand total of 0 Forma and will be good enough to quickly test out Harrow to see if you like his general playstyle. The second, and for me best way to play Harrow, is by using Evade, as I've covered in my previous Evade video. Evade makes Harrow instantly feel a lot more comfortable to play and synergizes amazingly well into his kit, as it's also focused around dealing headshots, even keeping faithful to Harrow's general theme. Evade can be subsumed over his first or third ability. The choice of which of Harrow's features you want to sacrifice is up to you. If you feel comfortable with the energy economy you have without Thurible, then replace his third option. This will also retain the ability to use Condemn, which works well with Penance to increase the uptime and keeps the option for locking down acolytes during trickier gameplay scenarios in high-level content. In this case, you need to make sure you use something like Equilibrium on your build to make sure you always stay topped up on energy. However, in missions with lower enemy density like Disruption, you might actually be better off subsuming Evade over Harrow's Condemn, as energy can be really hard to come by, and running out of energy with an Evade that is on cooldown, staring in the eyes of level 10,000 enemies on a Disruption is a sure way to meet your demise. Using Evade also unlocks the ability to use Arcane Crepuscular, which synergizes with Harrow like no tomorrow. A final 3 times increase to crit damage that can then be scaled by crit tier? Yes please. The other Arcane slot is fully up to you to choose. So run whatever you think will help out for your build, it being Multificiency for more duration, or Arcane Precision for more damage on your dual toxicists. Anything goes. The next Harrow build is my go-to build for helping friends fully level their weapons and Warframes in Sanctuary Onslaught within 1 or 2 rounds. On this build, I subsumed the earlier mentioned Thermal Sunder from Gauss onto Harrow's 1. I want to stress that it's very important that you subsume over his Condemn, as this allows you to spam cast Thermal Sunder even in Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, as your first ability will be never put on a cooldown, whereas your second, third and fourth ability will. This build is also very efficient in clearing base star chart Void Relic runs like Exterminates, Captures and Rescues. The reason this build works so nicely is that because every time you kill an enemy with Thermal Sunder, you will immediately refresh your energy pool as long as you have Harrow's third ability, Thurible, active. This means that you will never run out of energy, and the only thing that's keeping you back will be your casting speed. For the build, it looks like this and only uses a single Forma. I do use Archon Vitality here to double up on the fire procs that I get from Thermal Sunder, however you can leave this mod unranked. If you don't have a second one of these, you can easily find them on Warframe Market or in Trade Chat for about 20 platinum. The other mods focus more on power strength to make sure you are able to nuke the entire map, and maximum range to cover most of the tile sets that you will encounter. Then for the final build that I want to share, which is the support style Harrow. In comparison to the other builds, the weapon choices here are carefully made, and I do recommend using the same ones. For the primary, I'm using the Evensong, which on full bow charge has both multiplicative crit and multiplicative condition overload, which means that we can do, as you know, some crazy damage. However, the real reason that I went with the Evensong for this support build is that it will provide allies within affinity range a multi-shot boost of 35%, which, albeit a little small, is still nice to have. On the secondary, I use the Compressa with secondary encumber for when I want to dispose of a few enemies with Evensong's ridiculous damage. And on the melee, I use Harmony for another squad-wide buff to status duration. For Harrow's build itself, it will look very similar to the base Harrow build that I've shown before, but this time I used the Tribunal Augment to give my allies the effects of both Penance and Thurible. This can cause some quite funny gameplay with squad mates that are built for room nuking, as you will share their energy regeneration, supplying you with a metric ton of energy. I also considered using the Warding Thurible augment, but being stuck in Thurible to provide the buff feels pretty bad, and it feels like you could be doing more for the squad, running around and spamming your Condemn to lock down enemies and provide the other buffs. I can also recommend using the Phosphor Rod and Phosphor Blau items that I've discussed earlier in the video, as they increase the affinity range so much that you can provide most of the buffs to your allies even if they are several rooms away from you. Finally, I want to say that even though this build is more specified towards support, using the Evensong meant that I was still able to deal over 50% of the squad's damage, since headshots were sometimes hitting for literal hundreds of millions. So, Harrow. If I know anything, it's that this frame is one of my all-time favorites. The inherent synergies in his kit, combined with the insane damage output, while also providing team play benefits, makes him, in my opinion, incredibly strong and rewarding to use. The introduction of Evade makes his damage shine even more than ever before by finally providing an immensely comfortable option to do the highest level content in the game, and I couldn't recommend trying out this build enough. Make sure you give Harrow a go, and if you are watching this later down the line, Check the pinned comments to see if any of the bugs that I have discussed were patched or if any other things have changed since the making of this video. Huge thank you to all of the people watching and supporting the channel lately. More will be coming throughout 2025, and I hope to see you in those videos as well. Bye. As always, thanks to all channel members for supporting the channel. If you are looking to become a member, please find the join button below the video.